Hey guys, tonight we begin with a winter room that would feel almost impossible to us at first. Not a castle hall with bright fires and carved benches. Not a fairy tale cottage glowing gold beneath a perfect blanket of snow. Just a small, rural house somewhere in medieval Europe. Late in the year, when daylight has thinned to a grey strip above the fields, and the cold has begun to press its fingers into every crack in the wall. Outside, the ground is hard. The path is slick with old mud frozen into ridges. The garden is mostly bare now, except for stalks, roots, and whatever has been left under straw or earth because it may still be useful. The trees beyond the village are not the cheerful winter trees of paintings. They are fuel, boundary, danger, lordly property, and temptation. A branch on the ground is not just a branch. It is a little more heat, a little more cooking, a little more chance that tonight's embers will last until morning. And inside the house, there is no radiator sighing in the corner, no thermostat on the wall, no warm air rising through vents, no double-glazed window holding back the night. There may not even be a chimney as you imagine it. The main source of warmth is often an open hearth, low and smoky, with heat that does not fill the room evenly so much as gather in patches, cling to bodies, blacken rafters, sting eyes, and disappear too quickly when someone opens the door. So the question is simple, and a little unsettling. How did ordinary peasants survive this? How did a family sleep through a freezing night when the floor was cold, the roof was imperfect, the clothes were damp at the edges, and every piece of firewood had already cost work, time, rights, or risk? The answer is not that people in the Middle Ages were secretly immune to cold. They were not made of tougher material than us. Their fingers went numb, their feet ached, their lungs disliked smoke. Babies, the elderly, the sick, and the underfed were in real danger. Winter was not a decorative season. It was an exam the household had to take again and again, with no guarantee of passing. But medieval people did have something modern life has mostly allowed us to forget. They had a whole way of living arranged around cold. Their houses, clothing, meals, animals, sleeping habits, work rhythms, and neighbourhood obligations all formed a kind of rough survival system. Warmth was not one machine. Warmth was a stack of small defences. Tonight, we are going to walk into that system slowly. We will not turn medieval hardship into a cute little snow globe, but we also will not flatten it into misery. Because hidden inside the cold are many forms of practical intelligence. A smoky fire kept low because fuel was precious. A wool cloak that smelled of sheep and weather but still held heat. A pot of thick pottage that was not glamorous but warmed the body from the inside. A straw mattress shared by several people because privacy was less urgent than not freezing. A cow, a goat, or a few hens close enough that animal warmth and animal smell became part of the household air. A door kept shut not just for manners, but because one careless opening let the night walk in. If this kind of quiet history helps you settle down, you can like the video and subscribe for more slow journeys into the ordinary lives that rarely made it into royal chronicles, but carried most of the world on their backs. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you are standing just outside the house near dusk. The sky is already losing colour. In winter, the medieval working day changes shape because the sun itself becomes a strict master. There is no electric light waiting at home to stretch the evening into usable hours. Once darkness comes, work does not stop completely, but it changes. The most demanding outdoor tasks have to be pulled into the pale middle of the day. The evening belongs to animals, tools, mending, food, prayer, small repairs, and the heavy business of staying warm enough to sleep. The house in front of you is modest. Its exact form depends on region and wealth. Some rural homes are timber-framed, some built with wattle and daub, some with stone where stone is common, some with turf, clay, or thatch. The poorest are not neat little cottages but working shelters, built from local materials, repaired constantly, and shaped by what the household can afford, what custom allows, and what the local environment provides. The walls are not perfect barriers. They are negotiations with weather. There may be gaps stopped with clay, straw, cloth, moss, or whatever can be made to work. The roof may be thatch, thick enough to shed rain and help hold warmth, but never something you trust the way a modern roof is trusted. Smoke from the hearth may drift upward and darken the underside of it. In many houses, the smoke does not rush politely up a chimney. It hangs, wanders, finds its way through a smoke hole, through the thatch, through openings, through the patience of everyone beneath it. This sounds terrible, and sometimes it was. But smoke also tells you something important. The medieval home is not trying to be a clean, sealed, modern interior. It is trying to be survivable. A room may be smoky and still be the warmest, safest place available. The smell of the house is not one smell. It is wood smoke, damp wool, old straw, stored onions, leather, animals, ashes, bodies, and sour traces of ale or milk. To modern noses, it might feel overwhelming. To the people inside, it is the smell of not being outside. You push open the door, and the cold follows you in. Everyone notices. That is one of the first lessons of winter before modern heating. A door is not just an entrance, it is a wound in the wall. Open it too long and the room loses what little warmth it has gathered. A child may be scolded for lingering. A grown person comes in quickly, shoulders hunched, boots carrying mud or frozen dirt. There is no casual standing with the door open while chatting about the weather. The weather is already entering. The interior is dim. Firelight does not behave like a lamp. It moves. It throws the room into brown and orange patches. Corners remain shadowed. Smoke softens the air. The hearth is the heart of the house, but it is not a generous heart. It gives heat unevenly. The person closest to it may feel their face warm while their back stays cold. The floor keeps its chill. The walls breathe cold. The roof space holds smoke and darkness, and yet everyone gathers toward it. Not dramatically, not like a painting of peasants being picturesque. They gather because the body understands heat better than pride does. Hands extend, feet shift. A pot sits near the fire, because warmth that cannot be stored in the room can at least be stored in food. Thick pottage, made with grains, peas, beans, leeks, onions, cabbage, herbs, or whatever the household has, is not just dinner. It is internal heating. It is warmth you can swallow. This matters because in a peasant household, calories are not abstract. They are fuel in the most literal sense. A cold body burns more energy. A working body burns more still. Winter can be quieter in the fields than harvest season, but it is not idle. Wood must be gathered or managed. Animals must be fed. Water must be carried. Tools must be repaired. Dung, straw, fodder, fences, roofs, and clothing all demand attention. Cold does not end labour. It changes its shape and makes every chore heavier. You can begin to see why survival was layered. The fire alone could not do it. A medieval peasant family could not simply blaze through fuel as if the forest were an open warehouse. Access to wood was shaped by custom, ownership, law, manorial rights, local scarcity, and the patient work of gathering. In some places, peasants had rights to collect deadwood or use common land. In others, taking wood could bring punishment. Even where fuel was available, collecting it took time and strength, and winter made both more expensive. So the household learns not to waste flame. Embers are guarded. Ash is useful. Small fuel may be fed carefully. The fire is a tool, not a decorative comfort. It cooks, warms, dries, lights, and keeps some sense of life in the room. Letting it die at the wrong time means beginning again with effort, and perhaps with embarrassment, because asking a neighbour for fire carries its own small admission. In a village, survival is personal, but never entirely private. The people around the hearth are wearing their warmth as much as sitting beside it. Linen lies closer to the skin, where it can be washed more easily. Wool goes over it, because wool remains one of the great medieval answers to cold. It can hold warmth even when damp. It can be woven thick, layered, patched, handed down, slept in, worked in, and smelled in long before anyone worries about looking elegant. Clothes are not fast fashion. They are stored labour. A cloak is sheep, shearing, spinning, weaving, fulling, dyeing perhaps, cutting, sewing, mending, and years of use. Even a humble garment contains a chain of effort. At night, people do not necessarily undress into separate sleepwear and drift into private rooms. Privacy is a luxury that many poor households do not possess in the modern sense. Bodies share space. That can feel strange to us, even uncomfortable. But in winter, shared space is heat. A family sleeping close together under wool, fur where available, blankets, cloaks, and covers stuffed or laid with straw is not just a social arrangement, it is a thermal strategy. The house itself may help by being small. A cramped room is unpleasant in many ways, but a small volume of air is easier to warm than a large one. Low ceilings, thick walls, interior partitions, and sleeping platforms or loft spaces can all change how heat is felt. Even smoke-dark rafters tell a story of rising warmth, trapped imperfectly above human heads. And somewhere nearby, perhaps under the same roof in a buy-a-house arrangement in some regions, or in an attached space, or just close enough to matter, animals breathe through the dark. This is not universal. Medieval Europe is too varied for that. But where humans and livestock shared a building or close structure, it was not because peasants were too foolish to notice smell. They noticed. Of course they noticed. It was because animals were wealth, food, traction, manure, milk, risk, and warmth. A cow is not a pet radiator, but its body gives off heat. Its survival matters to the household. Keeping animals protected through winter protects the future. So the cold outside meets a strange resistance inside. Not comfort, exactly, but concentration. People, animals, food, fire, clothing, tools, smoke, straw, and stored harvest all pulled close together. The room is still cold by modern standards. You would want your thermostat. You would want dry socks. You would want to open a window and close it again, and then complain anyway. But the medieval household is not aiming for our idea of comfort. It is aiming for endurance. And as the first full dark settles over the village, the most important thing in the room may be something that looks almost too small to matter. A bed of embers, red under grey ash, watched with the quiet seriousness of people who know that morning warmth begins the night before. Before anyone sleeps, the household must make a decision that sounds small, but reaches into the whole winter. How much of the fire can be spent tonight? That is the kind of question modern heating hides from us. We turn a dial and the cost moves somewhere else, into a bill, a pipe, a power station, a system too large to feel in the hand. In a medieval village, heat is still close enough to touch. It has weight. It has bark, splinters, dampness, smoke, and law attached to it. It has to be cut, gathered, carried, dried, guarded, and sometimes argued over. It may belong to a lord's woodland, a common right, a hedgerow, a coppice stand, a bundle gathered by children, or a pile that looks much too small for the length of the season ahead. So the fire is treated almost like a living thing, but not in a romantic way, more like a hungry animal that must earn its place indoors. Feed it too generously, and the room becomes warmer for a while. Yes, but tomorrow's cooking grows uncertain. Feed it too little, and the evening stretches out with cold fingers, and the pot takes longer, and damp clothes stay damp. The art is not making a roaring blaze. A roaring blaze is what a tired modern mind imagines when it thinks of old winter comfort. In many peasant homes, the wiser fire is smaller, watched, coaxed, adjusted, protected under ash, and made to do several jobs at once. It cooks the evening meal. It gives off light. It warms the nearest bodies. It dries a strip of cloth, if the household dares to hang it close enough and remembers before it scorches. It sends smoke upward, where smoke may preserve meat or fish in some homes, darken beams, discourage insects, and make everyone's eyes water with the quiet unfairness of useful things. A child crouched near the hearth learns early that warmth has rules. Not too close, not in the way. Do not kick ash. Do not waste sticks. Do not let sparks reach straw. Do not leave the door hanging open while someone outside finishes a sentence that could have been finished tomorrow. Cold teaches manners faster than a priest does. The meal thickening over the fire may be humble, but it is one of the real answers to the winter question. Pottage is easy to underestimate because the word itself sounds plain. But a pot of grain, peas, beans, leeks, cabbage, onions, herbs, scraps of fat if fortune allows, or a little salted meat on better days, is more than a recipe. It is a method of making scarce fuel useful. Boiling turns hard things soft. It lets several ingredients become one warm mass. It stretches flavour. It feeds children, workers, elders, and whoever has come in from the cold, with hands too stiff to be patient. Bread, too, carries heat in a hidden form. Not always fresh from a home oven, not always plentiful, and not always made from fine wheat. Rye, barley, oats, maslin. Whatever the region and means allow, could appear in forms modern taste might find coarse, dark, sour, or dense. But bread is stored sun. It is field labour made chewable. When winter narrows the world, every loaf carries summer and autumn inside it. Ploughing, sowing, weeding, reaping, threshing, grinding, baking, saving, and ale, small beer, or other household drink, where common is not merely a cheerful medieval stereotype. Water quality varied, and low-strength brewed drink could be part of daily life, though the details shifted by region and household. In winter, drink might be warmed or simply taken with food in the dim space near the hearth. Nobody is living in a tavern song. They are trying to make grain, water, fermentation, and habit serve the body through the cold months. The body needs warmth from outside, but it also needs energy inside. This is why hunger makes winter sharper. A well-fed person and an underfed person do not inhabit the same temperature. A strong young adult coming in from work, flushed and tired, may bear the room better than a thin child, a nursing mother, a feverish elder, or someone recovering from illness. The cold does not fall equally on everyone. It finds weakness. It tests stores. It counts how much land a family had, how good the harvest was, whether rent and dues were heavy, whether animals survived, whether illness arrived at the wrong time, whether a neighbour had enough to lend without endangering their own household. You can feel that social arithmetic in the room. The evening meal is not served like a modern dinner party, with privacy and preference gently respected. It is closer to distribution. Who needs more? Who gets less? What must be saved? What is too stale to ignore? What can be softened in the pot? What should be kept for morning? The mother, or another woman of the household in many cases, carries a great deal of this invisible calculation, though every family arrangement differs. Medieval survival often depended on labour that records barely noticed, because it happened beside the hearth rather than in the field court. A garment needs mending. A child's foot covering is wearing thin. A sleeve is damp. Straw must be managed. A small body must be checked for chill. The pot must not burn. The ashes must be kept. The fire must not leap where it should not. Somebody coughs. Somebody shifts a bench closer. Somebody complains that there is smoke in their eyes, which there is, and always has been, and apparently must be accepted as the price of not eating raw turnips in the dark. Outside, the cold is simpler. It just exists. Inside, Everything is negotiation. Even the architecture negotiates. The medieval peasant house often makes less sense if you judge it as a failed modern home, and more sense if you see it as a working organism. Its spaces are not separated according to modern ideas of comfort. They are arranged around labour, storage, animals, food, family, tools, and weather. A room may be crowded because emptiness is expensive to heat. The same space may be kitchen, workshop, sleeping place, storage area, and social room. Smells overlap because functions overlap. This is one reason the word home can mislead us if we imagine softness first. A peasant home is shelter, but it is also a barn of human effort. Baskets, tools, stored fuel, sacks, pots, spinning equipment, repaired leather, wooden bowls, coarse cloth, cords, pegs, and hanging things all belong to the winter world. The house protects people from the season, but it also holds the materials by which the season is endured. Near the hearth, work continues after outdoor light fails. Hands spin thread, mend cloth, sharpen, sort, tie, patch, twist, and repair. Winter evenings can be long, but not empty. A spindle can turn in firelight, wool can be prepared, linen can be tended. Nets, baskets, straps, and handles can be put right. Tools used hard in better weather can be examined. The body may be tired, but the household cannot afford to let all hours vanish. And yet there is a softness inside this too, if we do not make it sentimental. People talk. They tell stories. They remember who owes whom. They grumble about weather, animals, hunger, taxes, priests, neighbours, and the impossible behaviour of children, which appears to have survived every century untouched. Someone laughs softly because a joke near the fire costs nothing and briefly warms more than the face. Sound matters in a winter room. The crack of a small stick, the wet murmur of the pot, a cough, a bench scraping, a baby stirring, wind worrying the edge of the roof, an animal shifting somewhere close enough to be heard. The low human noises of people conserving energy because darkness makes loudness feel unnecessary. When you listen carefully, you notice that survival is not heroic most of the time. It is repetitive. It is small acts done before they are urgent. Drying what can be dried, saving what can be saved, eating what must be eaten before it spoils, keeping the better blanket for the person who needs it most, or perhaps for the person whose authority says they get it. Because households are not always fair just because they are poor. Banked embers, patched cloth, stored onions, shared beds, and closed doors do not look dramatic. They are not the sort of details a chronicler usually praises, but they are the details that decide whether dawn is merely cold or dangerous. As the meal is eaten, the room slowly gives back less heat than everyone wants. The fire glows, but the walls are still winter walls. The floor remains stubborn. The dark beyond the door waits without effort. And the family, whether large or small, begins to move toward the next part of survival. Not making the house warm, exactly, but making the human body harder for the cold to reach. That begins with clothing. Because before a medieval peasant can make the room warm, they must make the body difficult for winter to steal from. The modern mind thinks of clothing as something chosen from a wardrobe. In this house, clothing is closer to stored survival. It is labour that can be worn. A woolen tunic, a hood, a cloak, a pair of hose, a patched sleeve, a wrapped foot, a linen layer against the skin. Each piece carries the work of animals, fields, spinning, weaving, washing, fulling, cutting, sewing, mending, and saving. Nothing in that chain is casual. Nothing is disposable in the way modern clothing so often pretends to be. Wool is the great winter ally, not because it is pleasant in every possible way, but because it is practical. It traps air. It keeps warmth near the body. It can still insulate when damp better than many fibres. It can be thickened, layered, patched, and worn until it becomes less an item of clothing than a familiar weather-beaten shell. Medieval people did not need a modern outdoor brand to understand layering. They knew, by touch and need, that warmth lives in trapped air, in overlapping cloth, in a hood pulled low, in a cloak arranged just so, while sitting near the hearth. But the clothes are not evenly distributed by comfort or fashion. They belong to a household economy. A better cloak may go to the person who must go outside. A drier garment may be saved for someone vulnerable or claimed by someone with authority. Children wear things handed down, cut down, remade, or improvised. Clothing is inheritance in slow motion. One person's worn sleeve becomes another person's patch. A hole is not a reason to discard cloth. It is a task, and winter is always searching for the holes. It enters at the wrist, where a sleeve has stretched. It enters at the neck, where breath dampens fabric. It enters through shoes, especially when the ground is wet as well as cold. Many peasants have footwear of leather, clogs, patterns, wrapped cloth, or other local solutions depending on place and period, but very few have the luxury of perfectly dry, insulated feet all season long. A person can keep walking with cold feet, of course. Humans are stubborn that way, but cold feet change the whole body. They make sleep harder. They make work clumsier. They make tempers shorter. A wet shoe in winter is a small disaster pretending to be ordinary, so the household watches dampness almost as carefully as flame. Cloth hung near the fire must be close enough to dry, but not close enough to burn. Shoes and wrappings must be placed where they may lose some of the day's wetness before morning. A cloak soaked by sleet is not merely uncomfortable, it is a stolen resource until it dries again. The room's smoky warmth is asked to do too much. Cook supper, warm bodies, light faces, dry cloth, preserve embers, push back the weather, and do all of this without eating too much fuel. This is why peasants did not live in the clean division modern people imagine. Outside clothes, inside clothes, sleeping clothes, work clothes, fresh clothes. There were changes, washings, and social expectations, of course, and linen undergarments mattered greatly where people could manage them. But poor households could not treat every activity as if it deserved a separate fabric world. In winter, people often remained layered through much of the day and night. Clothing was not just appearance, it was shelter that moved. The hood deserves its own quiet respect. A hood, coif, cap, or head covering is one of the simplest answers to cold, because the head and neck are places where comfort can vanish quickly. We sometimes mock old images of people sleeping in caps, as though everyone in the past was dressed for a bedtime comedy. But in a cold room, with breath visible near the bed and the fire lowered for the night, a covered head is not silly, it is sensible. The body does not care whether future centuries find its solutions charming. Hands are harder. Hands must work. They mend, stir, carry, tie, milk, chop, gather, lift, twist and hold. A hand hidden warmly inside a cloak is safe but useless. A working hand is exposed. Medieval gloves existed, and mittens or hand coverings were known in colder regions, but the poor could not always keep their hands protected while doing every task. Winter hands crack. Knuckles stiffen. Fingertips lose feeling. A person may warm them near the hearth, then send them immediately back into cold water. Cold rope, cold wood, cold animal hide, cold iron, cold earth. The body becomes a map of what work has taken from it. The knees ache from crouching, shoulders tighten under damp wool. The back bends toward the fire without anyone deciding to bend. Breath gathers in the throat when smoke sits low. The skin nearest the hearth warms first, sometimes too much, while the far side stays chilled. This is one of the small absurdities of open fire warmth. You can be too hot and too cold at the same time, roasted in front and wintered behind. like a loaf that nobody remembered to turn. Yet people adapt their posture. They sit close together. They tuck feet beneath benches. They keep cloaks wrapped even indoors. They use laps as warming places for hands, cloth, small objects, and sometimes sleepy children. They learn the warmer spots in the house the way sailors learn currents, near the hearth, but not in the smoke, away from the door, unless someone must be ready to move, not directly under the worst drip, not in the draught that slips between wall and frame. A medieval house has weather inside it, and the people know its little climates. Children learn them too. A small child may not understand manorial rights or grain storage, but they understand that the door is bad news if left open. They understand that the hearth is both comfort and danger. They understand that the best place is beside a warm body. They understand that being sent to fetch something from outside after dark feels like punishment, even when it is only necessity. Their winter education is not taught as a lesson. It is absorbed through scolding, imitation, and cold toes. For women especially, though not only women, warmth is tangled with textile work. Spinning is not just an image from a storybook. It is one of the great background sounds of household survival. Thread must exist before cloth can exist. Cloth must exist before garments, bedding, wrappings, sacks, and repairs can exist. In winter evenings, when field labour changes pace and darkness closes early, hands may continue this quiet production near the hearth. A spindle turning in dim light is not quaint. It is a small wheel inside the larger machinery of survival. Every thread carries time. That may be one of the hardest things for us to feel. In a modern store, cloth appears as if summoned by price tags. In a peasant household, cloth is slow. A blanket is not just a blanket. It is warmth made from months and years. Bedding, clothing, and coverings are capital. They hold value. They can be pawned, inherited, stolen, gifted, repaired, and mourned. A lost cloak is not an inconvenience. It is exposure. So when the household begins to prepare for sleep, it does not simply go to bed. It rearranges its defences. The fire is lowered, not abandoned. Ash is drawn. Embers are covered or preserved according to habit and hearth design. The pot is moved. Tools are set aside. A stool shifts. Someone checks the door. Someone sees whether a draught can be blocked with cloth, board, straw, or whatever poor weatherproofing the house can spare. A child is pulled closer. An older person is urged toward a warmer place, or perhaps must fight quietly for one. Because tenderness and hierarchy can live in the same room without resolving themselves neatly. The bed may not be a bed as modern imagination wants it to be. It may be a frame, a platform, a mattress, or sack filled with straw, chaff, hay, wool, feathers in wealthier homes, or other materials depending on means. Straw is not romantic. It pokes. It shifts. It must be changed when possible. It can harbour pests. But it also lifts the body from colder surfaces and traps air. It is another humble technology, so ordinary that it almost disappears from thought. A person lying on bare, cold ground loses heat quickly. A person lifted onto straw, wrapped in wool, beside another body, in a small room where the fire has recently lived, has a better chance. Not comfort as we define it, chance. That word matters, because winter survival was never equal, never certain, and never only about clever tricks. The better-fed household with more fuel, more bedding, sounder walls, healthy adults, and surviving animals enters the night with advantages. The poorer neighbour enters with fewer, a widow, an orphan, a land-poor labourer, someone ill, someone old, someone whose harvest failed. Each meets the same weather with a thinner shield. The cold does not need cruelty. It only needs access. And medieval people spent the evening reducing that access by degrees. One patched sleeve, one covered ember, one shared blanket, one closed shutter, one bowl of hot pottage, one child tucked away from the draft. Winter was fought not by defeating it, but by slowing it down before it reached the skin. That slowing down continues in the bed itself, which in a cold medieval house is not just a place of rest, it is a piece of winter equipment. The word bed can trick us. It brings up a private room, a soft mattress, sheets washed by machines, a pillow chosen for the exact needs of the neck, and perhaps the small modern outrage of one foot being slightly too warm under the duvet. In a peasant household, a bed may be far simpler, and sometimes shared in ways that would feel crowded to us. It may be a wooden frame if the household has one, or a raised platform, or a mattress stuffed with straw, chaff, hay, wool, or whatever filling is available. In poorer circumstances, it may be little more than a prepared place to lie down, improved by layers, coverings, and bodies. But even the simplest bedding has logic. The first task is to lift the sleeper away from the coldest surface. A floor of packed earth, clay, stone, or boards can pull heat from the body with quiet patience. Put straw between body and floor, and the situation changes. Straw traps air. It creates a barrier. It is not luxurious. It rustles, it pricks, it compresses, it carries smells. It may harbour fleas, lice, or mice if badly kept, and keeping it fresh requires resources. But winter is full of imperfect answers, and straw is one of them. It does not need to be elegant to be useful. Then come coverings, wool blankets, if the household has them, cloaks pulled over sleeping bodies, old garments pressed into service, furs in some regions and households, though not something to imagine as common luxury for everyone. Sacks, wraps, hangings, and improvised layers all become part of the night's defence. The line between clothing and bedding can blur. A cloak worn outdoors by day may become a cover at night. A garment too worn for best use may still hold heat across knees or feet. Nothing soft is wasted if it can stand between skin and winter. And then there is the oldest heat source of all, another human body. This is where modern privacy begins to lose its authority. In many peasant homes, the idea of each person sleeping alone in a separate room would not merely be impossible, it would be foolish. Beds were expensive, space was limited, fuel was limited, blankets were valuable. Children often slept together. Servants, apprentices, siblings, and household members might share arrangements shaped by custom, age, status, gender, decency, necessity, and available room. The exact rules varied widely, and medieval people certainly had ideas about propriety. But they also had winter. Winter has a way of editing ideals. A shared bed can be uncomfortable. Someone kicks, someone snores, someone smells of smoke, sweat, wool, animal work, and the day's weather. A child steals covering with the ancient skill of children everywhere. An older person may need more space than the bed can give, but shared sleep saves heat. Bodies create a small climate under the covers. Breath warms the air around faces. Feet pressed near other feet become less cold than feet abandoned alone at the edge of the straw. The household sleeping pattern may also follow the fire. People do not always sleep through the night in one clean modern block. In pre-industrial Europe, especially in long winter darkness, sleep could be broken by waking periods. Prayer, small tasks, feeding a child, tending animals, checking the fire, or simply lying awake while the house creaked and the wind worked at the roof. We should be careful not to force every household into one neat pattern, but the long night was not always the same as our electric night sleep. Darkness had room inside it. A person waking in the middle of the night may listen first. That is a very old habit. Before eyes fully open, the ears ask what has changed. Is the wind worse? Has the door shifted? Is an animal restless? Is the baby breathing normally? Has the fire gone too low? Is someone coughing in a way that is ordinary or not ordinary? In a world without instant light, sound is part of safety. If the sleeper rises, the cold rises too. Leaving the bed is an event. The body has built a little warmth under covers, and the room outside that pocket has been waiting. The first movement lets cold air slide in at the neck. Feet search for something better than the floor. A hand reaches for a garment. No one wants to be the person who has to get up unless necessity has clearly won. This may be one of the most relatable parts of the whole medieval winter, because even with all our modern comforts, almost everyone knows the small betrayal of leaving a warm bed in a cold room. Only in the medieval house, the betrayal has sharper teeth. There may be no lamp readier to switch. Light means flame. Flame means fuel. If the moon is faint and the hearth glow low, movement is guided by memory. The bench is there. The pot is there. The child is there. The stool should be there, unless someone moved it, which of course someone has, because humanity has always enjoyed leaving objects exactly where bare toes will find them. The fire may be banked beneath ash, and this is one of the quiet technologies of the night. Ash can protect embers, slowing their loss, keeping enough life in them to be revived later. A dead fire is not always a catastrophe, but it is trouble. Sparks must be coaxed, tinder must be found, dryness matters, breath matters, patience matters. In some communities, neighbours might share fire when needed, but needing that help is still a reminder that warmth is social as well as material. To keep embers is to borrow morning from the night. That little red glow under ash is a promise the household has made to itself. There will be cooked food again. There will be a way to warm hands. There will be a centre to gather around when the grey returns. It is not grand. It is not heroic in the storybook sense. But a great deal of peasant winter depends on preserving small continuities. One flame to the next. One meal to the next. One dry pair of wrappings to the next. One patched blanket lasting until spring. The room's darkness also changes the relationship between people. In daylight, a house is cluttered with tasks. At night, it becomes breath, cough, shifting weight, and murmured speech. Someone may whisper a prayer, not as decoration, but because winter makes dependence easy to feel. God, saints, weather, harvest, livestock, illness, childbirth, hunger, and luck, all seen closer in the dark. Whether one was deeply devout, habitually observant, fearful, practical, or some human mixture of all of these, the medieval night belonged partly to the unseen. But there is nothing abstract about the cold. It presses through the bed's edges. It makes the nose cold before the rest of the face. It stiffens the hand that has slipped out from under the cover. It gathers in the corners and near the door. It settles low where feet live. And if the roof leaks, or a draught finds a gap, or snow blows against the walls, the house seems less like a barrier and more like a tired old animal standing between the family and the weather. This is why the location of sleep matters. People learn which part of the room is least punishing. The place closest to the hearth may be warmer, but it may also be smoky or unsafe. The place near the animals may be warmer in some arrangements, but noisier, smellier, and not always desirable. A loft or raised sleeping area may catch more warmth, but access, space, and household status shape who gets it. Children may be tucked where adults can reach them. Infants require special care, though the past was painfully dangerous for the very young, and no amount of tenderness could remove all risk. A peasant household does not sleep democratically. It sleeps according to need, authority, habit, gender, age, kinship, and whatever the architecture permits. The old and the small may be protected, or they may suffer first when resources are thin. A husband and wife may share warmth but also exhaustion. A servant may sleep where assigned. A child may curl against a sibling and learn that family is not only affection, it is also shared weather. And outside, the village has gone mostly dark. A few fires remain. A dog may bark. Somewhere, a shutter knocks. In a barn or byre, an animal shifts and exhales into the cold. The fields, so busy in other seasons, lie under frost or mud or snow, storing the next year's anxiety beneath the quiet. There is no great silence, really. Rural winter has small sounds: wind in thatch, branches scraping, water skinning over with ice, distant footsteps if someone is unlucky enough to be out late. Inside, under wool and smoke-dark rafters, the sleepers become part of the house's warmth. Not guests in a heated interior, but contributors to a fragile climate. Their bodies warm the bedding, their breath dampens the air, their clothes hold yesterday's fire smell. Their closeness is not always chosen, but it is useful. The house shelters them, and in a small way, they heat the house back. By midnight, the fire is no longer a bright centre. It is a hidden red thought beneath ash. The meal has settled in stomachs. The day's labour has entered muscles. The damp things near the hearth have dried a little, or not enough. The door holds. The roof holds. The blankets hold. And that is winter survival at its most honest. Not triumph, not comfort, not a cosy myth, but a series of things holding just well enough until morning. Morning does not arrive all at once. It leaks slowly into the house. Grey before gold, cold before useful. A thin change in the darkness that tells people the night has not beaten them this time. No one wakes into comfort. They wake into calculation. The first person to rise feels the house at its worst. The bodies under bedding have kept their own small island of warmth, but the room has cooled around them. The hearth is low. The air is stale with smoke, breath, damp cloth, and the sour, sweet smell of yesterday's food. The floor waits like a punishment. A hand reaches out from under cover and finds not morning freshness, but the blunt fact of winter still present inside the room. This is the hour when the banked embers matter. If the ashes had done their work, if the fire was covered carefully, if no draught stole too much life from it, there may still be a dull red glow beneath the grey. It does not look impressive. A modern person might miss it, seeing only ash and thinking the fire is gone. But someone used to this house knows how to read it. A breath, a careful stir, a little dry tinder, a splinter, a twist of straw, perhaps a saved shaving of wood, and the night's last heat can become morning's first flame. This is not just convenience, it is continuity. To relight the fire from nothing takes time and materials. Flint and steel, embers borrowed from a neighbour, fire carried from another hearth, dry tinder kept safe from damp. All of these are possible, but none are as easy as preserving what you already had. A household that keeps its embers alive has saved labour before the day even begins. It has kept yesterday from entirely dying. The first smoke of morning rises, reluctant and searching. It thickens before it finds its way upward. Eyes blink. Someone coughs. Someone mutters. The fire, like everyone else in the house, needs coaxing before it becomes useful. Then the day begins to gather around it. A pot may be set near the heat again. Perhaps there is leftover pottage to warm, or grain to cook, or water to heat, if the household can spare fuel for that purpose. Breakfast for poor peasants is not a universal picture. It varies by region, season, wealth, labour demands, and custom. But the winter body wants something. It wants warmth inside, even if the meal is plain. Cold work on an empty stomach can turn a person weak very quickly. The house slowly wakes in layers. A child resists leaving the bedding because children, across time, have always been honest philosophers of warmth. An adult has less freedom to be honest. Animals must be tended. Water may need carrying. Fuel must be checked. The day's tasks do not wait because the floor is cold. And before anyone steps outside, the household must dress not for style, but for impact. Yesterday's dampness is judged. Did the hose dry enough? Are the shoes stiff? Is the cloak still wet at the hem? Has smoke improved the smell of anything? No, probably not, but it has made damp cloth less dangerous than it might have been. The winter house is full of such partial victories. Not dry, but drier. Not warm, but warmer. Not comfortable, but possible. The door opens, and morning enters like a person with bad manners. Whatever warmth has begun to collect near the hearth is disturbed at once. The outside air moves through the room, and everyone's body notices. This is why the first chores are so often an exchange. The house must lose warmth so life can continue. Someone must go out. Someone must bring in water, check animals, fetch fuel, clear a path, carry waste, look at the weather, and face whatever the night has done. Water is one of winter's most ordinary difficulties. And ordinary difficulties are the ones that shape life most completely. If water is stored indoors, it may be limited. If it must be fetched, the path may be icy, the vessel heavy, the source partly frozen, the hands exposed. A bucket is not poetic when it is full and your fingers are cold. It pulls at the shoulder, it knocks the leg, it spills. It reminds the body that before breakfast can warm anyone, someone must do the cold work that allows cooking to happen. Animals may need attention before people feel ready to give it. A cow, if the household has one, is not simply property resting in the background of peasant life. It is milk, manure, future calves, pulling power in some contexts, and a living store of value. Sheep, goats, pigs, hens, geese, oxen, horses, and other animals vary by region and wealth, but all winter animals create demands. They need fodder, they need shelter, they need checking. Their breath may warm a byre, but their bodies also consume precious stored feed. An animal surviving the winter can mean the household survives spring more securely. An animal lost to cold, hunger, disease, or accident is not just sadness. It is an economic wound. So the peasant winter morning is full of animal sound. A lowing cow, a hen's offended complaint, hooves shifting in straw, the wet sound of breath in cold air, the scrape of a wooden door or hurdle. The smell is strong, especially where animals are close to human living spaces. Modern people often want to turn that smell into a joke, but it is more useful to treat it as information. Manure means fertility for fields. Animal warmth means protection for life that matters. The stink of the byre is tied to bread months later. Nothing is isolated. Fodder is another kind of stored summer. Hay, straw, leaves, grains, peas, beans, or other feed depending on place and animal. These are not merely supplies, they are decisions made long before snow arrived. Every mouth in winter competes quietly with every other future need. Feed the animal too poorly and it weakens. Feed it too much too early and stores may fail before spring. Slaughter may be necessary for some animals before winter deepens, especially if feeding them through the season would cost more than the household can bear. Preserved meat, salted or smoked where possible, belongs to this same hard arithmetic. Winter survival, then, is not only about staying warm tonight, it is about not eating the future by mistake. This is why autumn mattered so much. The coldest night in January was partly survived in September and October. Grain stored in a chest, roots packed away, beans dried, onions braided, cabbages kept, apples saved if available, nuts gathered, animals selected, fuel stacked, thatch repaired, tools checked, wool worked, cloth mended. Medieval winter was prepared for before it arrived, though preparation could fail through bad weather, poor harvest, war, disease, heavy dews, or simple poverty. When we ask how peasants survived freezing winters, we should really ask how many earlier days had to go right first. The morning room contains the answer. The pottage is possible because something was harvested and stored. The fire is possible because fuel was gathered and kept dry enough. The cloak is possible because sheep were shorn, fibres worked, cloth made, and holes repaired. The bed worked because straw was saved or replaced. The animal is alive because fodder was cut and carried. The child is warm because someone woke, checked, tucked, fed, and scolded. Survival is not a single brave night. It is a chain of unglamorous preparations, any one of which can break. And still the work continues. A person going outside may wrap their cloak tighter, pull a hood forward, and step into air that makes the face tighten. Frost can stiffen grass, whiten thatch, glaze puddles, and turn mud into ridged ground. Snow, where it falls heavily, changes sound. The village becomes quieter, but not easier. Paths disappear, loads grow awkward, tracks become clues, animals, neighbours, strangers, trouble. Smoke from other houses rises slowly, showing who has managed to wake their hearth and who, perhaps, is struggling. There is comfort in seeing others smoke, not sentimental comfort, but practical comfort. It means the village is alive. It means there may be help if needed, news if necessary, borrowed flame, shared labour, gossip, warning, witness. Peasant life could be harsh, unequal, suspicious, and full of obligations. But isolation was dangerous. Winter made community visible in the most basic ways. Who has fuel? Who has food? Who is sick? Who has lost an animal? Who needs a hand? Who is pretending not to need one? The cold does not respect household walls, but neither does survival stop at them. By the time pale light strengthens, the medieval winter day has already required more effort than many modern mornings ask from us before coffee. Fire coaxed back, food warmed, animals checked, water dealt with, clothing judged, children moved, doors opened and closed quickly, dampness watched, fuel counted, breath seen in the air. And all of it has happened without drama. Because drama is for the unusual. This is ordinary. That may be the deepest answer hidden in the morning. Medieval peasants survived freezing winters not because winter was less severe, not because they loved hardship, not because every cottage was secretly cosy, but because survival had been built into routine. The household did not wait until cold became an emergency. It lived as if cold was always near, because for much of the year it was. The ember becomes flame. The pot begins to warm. The animal breathes in the byre. A child finally leaves the bedding with the tragic dignity of someone asked to endure the impossible. The door opens again. A gust enters. Someone curses softly. Because historical accuracy requires us to admit that no century has ever made people cheerful about drafts. And the day, still grey and hard-edged, begins. And once the household is moving, the cold changes its shape again. It is no longer only the cold of bedclothes, floorboards, and a fading hearth. It becomes the cold of work. This is an important turn, because a peasant did not survive winter by hiding from it completely. The house protected life through the night, but morning forced bodies back into the weather. Someone had to step out. Someone had to lift, carry, feed, chop, mend, lead, scrape, and fetch. Even in the quieter agricultural season, winter did not mean rest in the soft modern sense. It meant a different kind of labour, slower perhaps, but often heavier, because everything resisted the hand. Wood is a good place to begin, because almost every warm thing in the house has already passed through somebody's arms. A piece of fuel near the hearth may look simple, but it carries a story of access. Medieval peasants did not all wander freely into endless forests taking whatever they wished. Woodland was shaped by custom, lordship, common rights, local need, and local punishment. In many places, people might gather fallen branches, cut under certain rules, use coppiced wood, collect brush, or rely on hedgerows and managed trees. In other places, rights were tighter, woods were watched, and the line between necessity and theft could become dangerously thin. So winter heat was partly legal. That sounds strange at first, but it is true in the most practical way. A family's warmth could depend on whether local custom allowed them to gather deadwood, whether a lord enforced restrictions harshly, whether common land remained available, whether neighbours tolerated small taking, whether a storm brought branches down, or whether the family had the strength to haul fuel before the worst weather arrived. A peasant could be cold not because wood did not exist somewhere in the landscape, but because that wood was not truly theirs. The forest itself was not simply nature. It was a contested storehouse. It held fuel, timber, grazing, mast for pigs, wild foods, tools, fences, building materials, and danger. It also held authority. A poor household looking at trees in winter did not see a postcard. They saw heat they might not be allowed to touch. They saw work measured in loads, a bundle of sticks collected by a child, an old person, or a tired woman on the way back from some other errand could matter. Not enough to create comfort, perhaps, but enough to keep a pot going or help revive embers. There is a deep difference between having fuel and having enough fuel to waste. A household that has to count its sticks experiences fire differently. The hearth is not a place for dramatic flames unless there is reason. Cooking, baking, drying, brewing, some urgent need, some social gathering, or the relative luxury of a better-off home. The poor fire is often economical. It is watched like dough rising or milk near boiling, because neglect is costly. Even ash is part of the economy. Ash can protect embers. Wood ash can have uses in cleaning, lye making, fields, or household work depending on local practices. Nothing near the hearth is merely left over until people have decided it has no further use. Fuel also needs dryness, and winter is not kind to dryness. Wood cut too late may smoke badly and burn poorly. Damp sticks hiss and sulk. Peat, where used, must be cut, dried and stored. Dung might be dried for fuel in some regions and circumstances, though it should not be imagined everywhere. Brushwood, straw, reeds, turf, charcoal, and other fuels belong to different landscapes and economies. The main point is not one universal medieval fuel, but a universal pressure. Heat had to be gathered long before it was felt. The same is true of food. The winter meal begins months earlier in fields and gardens. Grain must be stored where rodents, damp, theft, and spoilage cannot easily take it. Peas and beans must be dried. Roots may be stored in clamps, pits, cellars, or other local arrangements where possible. Cabbages, onions, leeks, apples, nuts, herbs, salted meat, smoked fish, cheese, butter, ale, and preserved foods vary by region and wealth, but all belong to the larger winter question. A household survives the freezing night partly because someone thought about rot in autumn. Preservation is not glamorous, but it is one of the great medieval arts of staying alive. Salt, smoke, drying, fermentation, cool storage, and careful timing extend the life of food. Yet each method has limits. Salt costs money or access. Smoke requires fuel and the right arrangement. Drying needs weather and space. Storage can fail. Rodents are not respectful of human planning. Mold has no sympathy for hunger. A bad harvest does not become good because people are disciplined. A household can do many things correctly and still face a lean season if the world outside the door has been unkind. This is why winter hunger often hides behind winter cold. When people imagine freezing, they picture skin and air. But the body fighting cold needs food. Without enough calories, warmth becomes harder to make from the inside. A person may sit near the same fire as yesterday and feel colder because the bowl is thinner. Children may become quieter. Work may become slower. Illness may find the household more easily. The line between discomfort and danger can be as thin as the contents of a pot. So the medieval peasant winter was also a winter of measurement. Not measurement with neat numbers written in a ledger by every household, though some dues, rents and manorial accounts certainly created records elsewhere. It was measurement by eye, hand, habit and worry. How much grain remains? How many onions? How much fodder? How much fuel? How long until the worst cold passes? How long until spring greens? How much can be eaten today without making tomorrow cruel? Which animal can be fed through? Which animal must be slaughtered? Which neighbour has suffered more? Which relative might help? Which obligation cannot be delayed? There is nothing romantic about this arithmetic, but there is intelligence in it. A household does not need modern science to understand rationing. It feels rationing in the scoop, the slice, the ladle, the bundle, the armload. It understands that the future has a mouth. Every time someone adds more grain to the pot, the future eats less, or the present survives better. The art is knowing which matters more today. And then there is the body, at work in the cold. Imagine carrying a bundle of sticks with a cloth wrapped around your shoulders. The breath showing in the air. The load is awkward. Your fingers have to grip. If the path is icy, your feet must negotiate each step. If mud has thawed at the surface, it clings and sucks. If snow has drifted, the familiar path becomes work. Your clothes protect you, but they also weigh you down. Damp wool is loyal but heavy. Leather stiffens. A hood narrows what you can see. Your nose runs. Your hands ache. There is no heroic music. There is only the stubborn sound of a person doing what must be done. This is another way heat was made, by movement. Work warms the body for a while. Chopping, hauling, sweeping, mucking, threshing, walking, carrying water, turning compost, tending animals, repairing fences and moving stores all produce heat. A working body can feel warmer than a sitting body in the same weather. But this is not free warmth. It spends energy, it requires food, it risks sweat, and sweat in winter is dangerous when work stops and damp cloth begins to chill. A peasant had to balance effort and exposure without thinking of it in modern technical language. Too still, and cold deepens. Too wet, and cold returns sharper. The rhythm of winter labour is therefore cautious. People work when light allows. They seek shelter when necessary. They bring some tasks indoors. They cluster work near the hearth when possible. They use barns, sheds, byres, lean-tos, and whatever cover exists. They accept discomfort that modern people would report immediately to customer service, though sadly no medieval support line appears to have offered help with frozen buckets, smoky rooms, or pigs with strong opinions. Yet humour, if it came, did not cancel hardship. It helped people stand near it. In the village, everyone knows that winter work is shared unevenly. The land-holding peasant, the cottager, the servant, the widow, the young labourer, the child old enough to carry but not old enough to understand why, all have different burdens. Some owe labour services, rent, or dues. Some must seek wage work. Some rely on gleaned, gathered, borrowed, or bartered resources. Some enter winter with better stores and stronger animals. Some enter already behind. The weather may be the same, but the winter is not. The better-off household can burn more, eat more, replace more, and survive mistakes. A poorer one has less room between error and danger. That gap is one of the honest facts beneath the title. Medieval peasants survived by skill, routine, community, and toughness, yes, but they also survived, or failed to survive, according to resources. Cold is physical, but poverty decides how deeply it can enter. By midday, if the sun appears, it may offer brightness without much heat. The village surfaces glitter, thaw, drip, or remain hard. Smoke rises from roofs. The smell of animals and fires hangs low. Somewhere a tool strikes wood. Somewhere grain is being handled. Somewhere a woman is bending over work near the hearth, doing the quiet labour that keeps everyone clothed and fed, but rarely wins a place in grand histories. Somewhere an older person sits where warmth can reach them. Somewhere a child is sent on an errand and moves with tragic slowness. Because children have always understood that errands expand in cold weather, and through all of it, the household's central question remains unchanged. How do we keep enough warmth for tonight without spending too much of tomorrow? That is why the day never fully leaves the night behind. The fuel gathered now becomes evening fire. The food saved now becomes tomorrow's strength. The animal fed now becomes spring's chance. The cloth mended now becomes a warmer body after sunset. Winter survival is circular. Every action bends back toward the hearth, toward the bed, toward the small red ember waiting to become another morning. The same question follows them beyond the yard, because winter is never only indoors or outdoors. It is a season that ties house, field, animal, road, church, forest, and neighbour together with the same cold string. By late morning, the village begins to show its pattern. Smoke rises from some roofs more steadily than others. Footprints mark the places where people have already gone for water, fuel, animals, or work. A door opens, closes quickly, opens again because someone forgot something, and closes with the special irritation reserved for people who have just let cold air in twice. Across the lane, another household is making its own calculations, not the same ones perhaps. A larger family, a smaller store of grain, a better cow, a worse roof, a sick child, a stronger son, a widow with less help, a prosperous peasant with more fuel stacked under cover. The village shares weather, but not safety. That difference matters. When we speak of medieval peasants surviving freezing winters, it is easy to imagine one simple peasant life. But the village is not a row of identical poor cottages filled with identical hardship. There are gradations everywhere. Some peasants hold more land, some have animals enough to make them feel secure, or at least less exposed. Some have good rights to common pasture or woodland, some have kin nearby. Some have tools, carts, storage, credit, or reputation. Others live much closer to the edge, with little land, wage labour, insecure work, thin stores, and fewer people to call upon when something goes wrong. Winter reveals the distance between them. In warmer months, the difference may hide under motion. Everyone is busy. Everyone sweats. Fields demand hands. Harvest demands backs. But winter sits down heavily in the village and asks each household what it has saved. It asks whether the roof was repaired in time. It asks whether fuel is dry. It asks whether the cow has enough fodder. It asks whether the children have shoes that still deserve the name. It asks whether there is grain enough to reach the next turn in the year, and whether someone has already borrowed against a future that has not arrived. The poor do not answer winter with ideas. They answer with what is physically present. A stack of wood, a sack of grain, a tub of salted meat if they are fortunate, dried peas, a few hard cheeses, roots under cover, bundles of straw, cloth patched too many times, a neighbour who might lend, a lord who might demand, a parish that might notice need, or fail to, a body still strong enough to work. This is where community becomes part of heating, though not in the cheerful way modern people sometimes use the word community. A village can be supportive, watchful, generous, gossipy, suspicious, controlling, and necessary all at once. People know who has lost an animal. They know whose child coughs through the night. They know who has burned through fuel too quickly. They know who is proud, who is careless, who is unlucky, who owes rent, who quarrels, who drinks too much, who still has good hay. Privacy is thin because walls are thin. Need is visible, and survival often requires witness. A household in trouble may seek help from kin, neighbours, parish charity, customary rights, temporary labour, credit, or small exchanges. A little grain, a share of fire, a loaned tool, help repairing a roof, a hand moving fodder, a watchful eye on a child. These are not grand gestures, but winter is built from small gestures. They may come with kindness, they may come with obligation, they may come with judgment attached, because human beings rarely manage mercy without commentary. The church also sits inside this winter world. Its bells measure time, its calendar shapes the year, its feasts and fasts give rhythm to scarcity and celebration. Its building may be one of the more solid structures nearby, though not a heated refuge in the modern sense for ordinary daily comfort. The parish can be a place of prayer, gathering, news, duty, charity, and social pressure. In winter, Religion is not simply belief floating above life. It is woven into fear, hope, illness, death, gratitude, and the need to make sense of a season that can take the week without asking permission. A mother with a sick child does not experience winter as an abstract climate. An old man with poor circulation does not experience it as scenery. A hungry labourer does not experience it as a quaint medieval atmosphere. Cold enters personal life with particular cruelty. It finds the body that has less fat, less food, less strength, less bedding, less luck. Yet the village also contains moments of warmth that are not just physical. A neighbour's fire seen through a doorway. Shared work in a barn. Voices near the church path. Someone bringing news from a market town. A borrowed ember carried carefully, as if holding a tiny piece of sunrise. These things matter because winter can shrink the world. Paths become harder, travel slows, days shorten. Bad weather makes distance larger. The village becomes more inward, more dependent on the people already within reach. Markets, too, if accessible, are part of survival. Not every household can simply buy what it lacks, and winter roads can be miserable. But trade, exchange, rents, dues, tools, salt, cloth, iron, grain prices, and access to town all shape what is possible. A bad winter is not only cold air, it is dear food, it is difficult transport, it is a shortage of fodder. It is the moment when a small lack becomes a larger one, because everyone nearby is also under pressure. Salt deserves a quiet place in this story. To modern people, salt is cheap, almost invisible. In the medieval household, it could be precious. It helped preserve meat and fish. It made food bearable. It carried cost, trade, taxation, and geography with it. A winter store, flavoured or protected by salt, is connected to roads, markets, coasts, mines, merchants, rights, and money. Even something as simple as preserved food brings the outside world into the peasant bowl. So does iron. An axe, a knife, a hook, a pot, a hinge, a horseshoe, a ploughshare, a nail. These objects matter painfully in winter. If a tool breaks, repairing or replacing it may require a smith, payment, barter, time, and access. A pot that can sit near the fire is not just kitchenware, it is survival hardware. A good knife is food preparation, animal work, repair, and daily usefulness in one object. The peasant household is full of quiet technologies, not because it is primitive, but because every useful object must serve repeatedly. Even the road beyond the village has winter meaning. A muddy road can become a frozen, ribbed path. A frozen path can become slick. Snow can hide ruts. Rain can turn everything back into clinging mess. Movement of grain, fuel, animals, people, and news depends on conditions underfoot. A person going to market, mill, church, manor court, or neighbouring hamlet is not merely travelling. They are spending bodily heat, daylight, and risk. Winter makes errands heavier. It stretches the cost of distance. And still, medieval peasants moved through it. They were not frozen statues huddled beside fires for months. They went to mills, to church, to neighbours, to woods, to fields, to barns, to markets when possible, to lordly obligations when required. They repaired fences, tended animals, cut and carried, spun and mended, brewed and baked, prayed and argued, married and buried, laughed and complained. The cold was always present, but it did not stop life. It altered the terms. There is a tendency to imagine survival as a single dramatic struggle between human and nature. But in the medieval village, winter survival is more like a web. Pull one strand and the others move. Fuel depends on rights. Food depends on harvest. Warmth depends on clothing. Clothing depends on textile labour. Animals depend on fodder. Fodder depends on land. Help depends on reputation and kin. Health depends on food, shelter, age, luck, and care. The hearth in the house is connected to the field outside. The field to the Lord to rent. The rent to grain. the grain to the pot to the child's warm stomach under a shared blanket. The ember is not alone. By afternoon, the village begins to lean toward evening again. The light has barely had time to become useful before it starts to thin. People feel the day folding inward. Whatever must be done outside becomes more urgent. Whatever can be brought in must be brought in. Animals need one more check. Water must be ready. Fuel must be near the hearth. Food must be considered. Damp things must be placed where they may improve before night. The door will open and close, each time negotiating with the cold, and somewhere in the grey light, a person looks toward another roof and sees smoke rising. That smoke means another family is still managing. Another hearth has caught. Another pot may be warming. Another set of hands has coaxed flame from ash, or borrowed fire, or spent precious fuel because there was no other choice. It is an ordinary sight, but in winter, ordinary sights can carry deep reassurance. The village is not warm, but it is alive. Alive, but never still for long. Even a winter village that looks sleepy from a distance is full of hidden movement, because the season keeps demanding small acts of prevention before anything becomes an emergency. One of those acts is repair. Cold does not only attack the body, it attacks the things that protect the body. It finds a weak place in the roof. It worries at a shutter. It stiffens leather. It loosens a peg. It makes old wood shrink. Damp straw slump. Hinges complain. Ropes harden. And clay crack. A medieval peasant household is always partly under maintenance. The house is not finished once built. It is a thing being defended against weather, animals, rot, use, and time. A draught is not a minor annoyance when fuel is scarce. A leak is not a small inconvenience when bedding is limited. A loose patch of thatch can become a cold drip over stored goods. A broken door fitting can mean more wind in the room. A cracked pot can be a food problem. A torn shoe can be a work problem. A frayed rope can become an animal problem. And an animal problem can become a spring problem. Winter turns little failures into chains. So people patch. They use clay, straw, boards, cloth, leather scraps, cord, wattle, pegs, wedges, whatever the local world offers. They stop gaps. They hang coverings. They repair shoes if they can. They replace straw. They check roofs when weather permits. They mend baskets, handles, straps, and sacks. The most ordinary peasant household contains a museum of temporary solutions, except no one inside would call them temporary if they were still working. This is a different relationship with objects than many modern people have. A thing is not replaced the moment it becomes ugly. Ugly is not a category that matters much when winter is asking sharper questions. Does it hold? Does it cover? Does it carry? Does it keep out wind? Does it keep in grain? Does it keep the animal from wandering? Does it keep the foot from direct mud? If yes, then beauty may wait for some other household in some other century. Cloth especially lives many lives. A garment may begin as a better piece, then become everyday wear, then patched wear, then a child's altered garment, then a wrapping, then a rag, then a draught stopper, then perhaps something used near the hearth or in cleaning. This descent is not failure. It is the full career of material in a world where fibre is labour. To throw away cloth too early would be almost an insult to the time stored in it. The same is true of straw. To us, straw is often scenery, a golden background in old pictures, something under animals, something rustic enough to appear charming until it gets inside a sock. But in winter, straw is everywhere in the logic of survival. It beds animals, it fills mattresses, it insulates, it pads, it covers roots, it absorbs damp, it mixes into building materials, it can be used in roofing, it can be carried, shifted, spoiled, saved, and argued over. Straw is poor magic. If magic is allowed to smell bad and poke the ribs, and straw connects the household back to the field. Bedding under a sleeping child and bedding under an animal both begin as part of the agricultural year. The harvest does not end when grain enters storage. Stems, chaff, hay, and waste all keep working. Medieval peasants survived winter partly because the farm produced not only food, but materials for warmth, shelter, and repair. This makes the house feel less like a separate indoor place, and more like a field folded inward. The walls contain harvest remains, animal products, wood from managed land, clay from earth, smoke from fuel, fibres from sheep or flax, and food from soil. Everything outdoors has been pulled inside and rearranged as protection. The house is not an escape from nature. It is nature reorganized just enough to keep human beings breathing through February. But the house also has enemies inside it. Damp is one of them. Damp makes cold more intimate. Dry cold can be bitter, but damp cold creeps into cloth, bedding, walls, and bones with a different persistence. A damp house is harder to warm. Damp fuel burns badly. Damp clothing chills. Damp grain spoils. Damp bedding becomes misery. Medieval households fought damp constantly with fire, smoke, airflow, storage choices, raised surfaces, and the plain hope that weather might allow things to dry before they rotted. Smoke, unpleasant as it was, could help in some ways. It dried certain spaces, discouraged some pests, and preserved food where smoking was practiced. But smoke was also a burden on lungs and eyes. A peasant house could be both protected and harmed by the same hearth. That is one of the recurring truths of pre-modern survival. The answer often arrived carrying its own problem. Fire warms, but burns fuel and fills rooms with smoke. Animals provide value and heat, but require fodder and bring smell, parasites, and labour. Straw insulates, but harbours pests and must be renewed. Shared beds conserve heat, but reduce privacy and spread discomfort. Thick wool protects, but grows heavy when wet. Small houses hold warmth better, but crowd people, goods, animals, smoke, and tempers under one roof. Nothing is pure solution. Everything is trade. The people inside this world do not need to say that aloud. Their hands know it. Their shoulders know it. Their noses definitely know it. The peasant household is an education in compromise, and winter is the strictest teacher. A modern home often tries to make comfort invisible. Silent heat, hidden pipes, clean floors, sealed windows, light at the touch of a switch. A medieval home makes every comfort visible because every comfort has to be maintained by someone. Even light is rationed. The short winter day gives little after sunset. Illumination comes from flame, hearth, rushlight, candle, oil lamp, or other local means depending on wealth and access. But artificial light costs. Tallow candles smell. Wax candles are generally more expensive and associated with better off or religious settings. Rushlights can be made more cheaply in places where rushes and fat are available, but they still take preparation. A poor household does not flood the room with brightness simply because evening has arrived. Darkness is normal. Work adjusts to it. This changes the feeling of winter indoors. People gather near the light because the light is also warmth. Work, food, and company. The edges of the room disappear. Objects are remembered more than seen. Faces are partial. Hands work by habit. Children learn where not to step. Adults learn to continue tasks with less visual certainty than modern people expect. The long night is not empty, but it is dim. Dimness can be restful, but it can also be limiting. Some work becomes harder. Reading, for those who could read and had anything to read, is not the central peasant winter image. More common are tasks that hands can manage near half-light: spinning, mending, sorting, repairing, tending, stirring, watching. Winter evening is tactile. It belongs to fingers as much as eyes. And fingers, by now, have spent the whole day defending the household. They have tied bundles, checked straps, felt cloth for damp, tested embers, carried water, broken ice, fed animals, handled tools, pushed doors closed, lifted pots, patched holes, wiped noses, rubbed cold feet, and found lost things in dark corners by touch. Hands are the first tools, and winter wears them down. Cracked skin can become painful. Dirt enters cracks, smoke dries, cold stiffens. Yet the work cannot pause simply because the hands object. This is where the body becomes another household object that must be maintained. Food warms it. Sleep repairs it. Clothing shields it. The hearth revives it. Family labour depends on it. A sick body is not only a private suffering, it changes the household's ability to survive. If one adult falls ill, the others carry more. If the person who knows how to manage the fire, stores, animals, or children cannot rise, winter grows sharper for everyone. Knowledge is not written down in the corner. It lives in bodies, and bodies are vulnerable. That vulnerability explains why old age and infancy stand so close to the centre of winter fear. An infant cannot regulate warmth well. An elder may feel cold more deeply and recover more slowly. A fever or cough in a smoky, cold, crowded house is not a minor inconvenience. Still, people cared as they could. They tucked, warmed, fed, prayed, watched, and made choices from within the limits of their world. We should be careful not to imagine them as indifferent just because the past was harsher. Hardship does not erase tenderness. It often makes tenderness work harder. By the time the day begins to fold toward evening again, the house may show signs of all this quiet maintenance. A damp cloth shifted closer to warmth, a gap blocked more firmly, a pot scraped, a tool repaired enough to last, straw moved where it is needed, a child's covering adjusted, a stack of fuel reduced by a few pieces and mentally recounted. The household has not conquered winter, it has negotiated another afternoon, and the fire waits to become the centre again. Outside, the cold gathers itself with patient confidence. Inside, the household gathers its defences with human stubbornness. Cloth, straw, smoke, food, wood, animals, hands, memory, and routine all move back toward the hearth. The day's work becomes the night's protection. The repairs become shelter. The patched things become warmth. The ugly, useful objects become beautiful only if you know what they have prevented. And prevention becomes more difficult when the season itself grows unstable. Not every medieval winter was the same kind of cold. Some were dry and hard, with frost holding the land in a grip that made paths firm but water troublesome. Some were wet and miserable, the kind of winter where mud seems to have learned persistence from sin. Some brought deep snow, some freezing rain, some thaws that turned yards into muck, then froze that muck into ridges sharp enough to punish every step. For the peasant household, these differences mattered more than any neat word like winter can hold. A dry freezing spell might make roads passable in one way and dangerous in another. A wet winter might soak thatch, rot stores, chill clothing, and make fuel stubborn. A snowy winter could insulate some things while trapping others, muffling sound and making movement slow. A sudden thaw might feel like mercy until it filled paths with water and made stored goods more vulnerable to damp. Weather was not background. It was a daily negotiation with changing terms. This is why medieval survival depended so much on local knowledge. A family knew where water froze first. They knew which path became impossible after rain. They knew which wall took the wind. They knew which part of the roof needed watching. They knew how long the fuel pile usually lasted if no one became careless. They knew which neighbour's yard flooded, which old tree might drop branches, which field held snow longest, which animal coughed when damp settled in. That knowledge did not sound impressive because no one called it expertise, but it was expertise. It was simply carried in memory instead of books. The village itself was a map of these small winter truths. A lane might be avoided because frozen ruts could twist an ankle. A hollow might collect icy water. A bridge might become slick. A stream crossing might need care. The churchyard path might be beaten down by many feet and become easier, or worse, depending on weather. A track to the woods might be worth using in daylight, but not at dusk. A neighbour's smoke might show which way the wind is moving near the roofs. The sky at sunset might be red for hints of frost, storm, or a cold, clear night that would bite harder than cloud. Peasants lived closer to these signs because ignoring them cost more. In a modern city, bad weather may delay traffic, ruin shoes, or offend a phone's weather app by arriving at a different time than promised. In a medieval village, bad weather can change the amount of fuel burned, the safety of animals, the condition of stored grain, the ability to reach a mill, the chance of a roof repair, the price of food, the spread of illness, and whether an old person's bed stays dry. The household watches the sky because the sky reaches into everything. Wind is especially important. Cold without wind is one kind of enemy. Cold with wind is another. Wind finds gaps more actively. It pushes smoke back where smoke is not wanted. It worries thatch, rattles shutters, steals warmth each time the door opens, and turns a small crack into a voice. A windy night can make a house feel as if the outside world is trying every handle. So people listen to the building. That may sound strange, but houses speak in weather. A roof rustles differently under snow than under rain. A shutter knocks in a known rhythm until it knocks wrong. A door shifts. A hanging object taps. A draft changes direction. Animals become restless before people fully understand why. The person who has lived in that house through years of seasons does not need a written report. They know when the building sounds ordinary, and when it sounds like work will be needed tomorrow. Snow brings another kind of quiet. If it falls thickly, the village changes. Edges soften. Filth disappears for a while under whiteness, though it has not gone anywhere. Footsteps are marked. Sound is muffled. Children may find pleasure in it, because children are wonderfully talented at discovering games in conditions adults consider logistical threats. But snow also hides hazards, slows journeys, burdens roofs, and makes every errand longer. Bringing water, fodder, or fuel through snow is not a painting. It is labour with wet hems and cold hands. Still, snow can also help in unexpected ways. A blanket of snow may protect the ground beneath from deeper freezing. It may reveal animal tracks. It may make some transport easier in regions and circumstances where sledges or dragging loads can be used. Medieval people did not experience weather only as suffering. They understood its mixed character. The same snow that delays one task may make another possible. The same frost that kills soft growth may firm a path. The same thaw that releases water may ruin stored straw if it comes with damp and carelessness. Winter is never one thing. This becomes clear in the care of animals. A beast that can tolerate dry cold may suffer badly in wet cold. Hooves, bedding, fodder, shelter, and ventilation all matter. Too much enclosure can create foul air and sickness. Too much exposure can weaken the animal. A peasant household keeping livestock through winter must manage not only human comfort, but animal microclimates, though nobody would use that word. Dry bedding, enough air, enough shelter, enough feed. Not too much waste. Not too much chill. The animal's breath in the cold is a sign of life, but the animal's needs do not pause. And the same judgment applies to stored food. Grain hates damp. Roots may freeze, rot, or sprout depending on how they are kept. Cheese, meat, fish, beans, and peas all have their vulnerabilities. A storage place must be cool, but not destructive, protected but not sealed into spoilage, accessible but safe from animals and thieves. In a poor household, there is rarely an ideal solution. There is only the best place available, watched carefully. One ruined store can change the winter. This is hard for us to feel, because modern abundance disguises spoilage as inconvenience. If something goes bad, we throw it away and complain with justice. But usually there is more somewhere else. In a medieval peasant winter, spoilage can carry a heavier silence. Mould in grain, rats in stores, a thaw that damages food, a leak dripping where it should not. These are not household annoyances, they are warnings. So the household senses are constantly working. Smell tells whether food is turning. Touch tells whether cloth is damp. Sight, in dim light, checks the grain's surface, the roots, the cheese, the animal bedding. Hearing notices scratching where there should be none. Even taste may confirm what is still usable, what must be eaten quickly, what can be stretched, what is no longer safe enough. A medieval peasant home is not ignorant of cleanliness or order simply because it smells different from ours. It has its own categories of safe, spoiled, usable, dangerous, blessed, wasteful, and not yet lost. The not yet lost category is very large. A board not yet broken. A garment not yet beyond patching. Food not yet rotten. Fuel not yet too damp. A sick animal not yet failing. A person not yet too weak to work. Winter life often happens inside that phrase. Not yet. Hold it longer. Use it carefully. Try again tomorrow. There is a quiet tension in such a life, but also a strange steadiness. When so much depends on maintenance, people become skilled at noticing small changes before they become disasters. The child learns that an odd drip matters. The adult learns that one loose thatch bundle should not be ignored. The old person, who may not carry heavy loads anymore, may still know exactly how the season is behaving, because memory itself is a winter tool. Someone who has seen 30 winters knows that a mild December can still become a cruel February. Someone who remembers a bad year knows not to trust a full store too early. Memory warns the household against optimism, yet hope still works its way in. It comes with slightly longer days. It comes when hens begin to lay more reliably. It comes when stored food has lasted better than feared. It comes when an animal recovers. It comes when a neighbour helps without too much judgment. It comes when a roof repair holds through the storm. It comes when the fire catches easily in the morning, as if the house itself has decided to cooperate. By late afternoon, weather begins to gather meaning again. The colour of the sky matters. A hard, clear sunset may promise a sharper freeze. Low cloud may keep the night less bitter but bring wetness. Wind direction may change the smoke. The household reads these signs while preparing for another night, because the next set of decisions depends on them. More fuel close at hand if the wind is rising. Extra attention to the door if snow is blowing. Animals checked again if damp has deepened. Bedding shifted if a leak has shown itself. Food chosen according to what must be eaten before it spoils, not according to what anyone would most enjoy. Desire is a luxury winter often edits. What matters is what keeps the chain from breaking. The house, repaired and smoky, dim and crowded, becomes again the centre of that chain. Outside, the weather has many faces. Inside, the household answers with fewer tools than we would like, but with sharper habits than we usually notice. A covered ember, a watched roof, a dry corner, a counted store, a patched sleeve, a child moved away from a draught, an old warning remembered at just the right moment. The freezing season is not survived by one great secret. It is survived by attention, repeated until attention becomes a way of life. Attention also meant knowing that the coldest danger was not always the most visible one. A dramatic snowfall announced itself. A hard wind made the walls speak. A frozen bucket, a blocked path, a white field under moonlight. These were obvious. But some of winter's worst work happened quietly, in the slow weakening of bodies and stores. A household could seem to be managing while losing strength day by day. The bowl might be a little thinner. The fire might be a little smaller. The animal might be fed a little less. The old cloak might be damp more often than dry. The child might be sleeping longer, not from peace, but from lack of energy. The adult might feel a tiredness that no single chore explains. Winter did not always arrive as disaster. Sometimes it arrived as subtraction. This is why food and warmth cannot be separated. A person who eats well can endure cold differently from a person who is underfed. The body is its own hearth, but it needs fuel, grain, beans, peas, bread, pottage, cheese, ale, milk, meat when available, fat when available, roots and greens in their season. All of these are not merely foods, they are heat becoming possible. A bowl of thick pottage near the hearth does two kinds of work at once. It warms the hands around it, then the stomach that receives it. It is humble, but it answers winter more honestly than any romantic image of a blazing fire. Fat, when a household had it, mattered deeply. A little bacon grease, butter, lard, dripping, cheese, milk, or meat could make food more sustaining. Poor households did not always have much. Some winters offered more animal products than others, depending on wealth, region, season, and survival of livestock. But the desire for richer food in cold weather is not merely taste. The body knows what it is asking for. It asks for dense energy. It asks for something that lasts. Medieval calendars often brought winter feasts as well as winter restraint. Christmas, saints' days, local customs, and household celebrations could briefly change the rhythm if resources allowed. A better meal in winter was not just pleasure, it was social memory, religious meaning, and bodily relief. Even poor celebration could matter. A little extra, a shared drink, a different taste, a moment when scarcity loosened its fingers. But feasting and fasting, abundance and lack, were never experienced equally. A lord's winter table and a peasant's winter pot belonged to the same season, but not the same world. For ordinary rural households, the great problem was duration. One cold night can be endured with extra fuel, extra food, and clenched determination. A season requires management. The store must last not until tomorrow, but until the next reliable food comes. And that next food may be uncertain. Spring is not instant rescue. Before new growth truly feeds people, there may be a hungry gap, that dangerous stretch when old stores run low and new harvest is still only promise. The end of winter can therefore be one of its cruelest tricks. The days lengthen. The light improves. The earth begins to smell alive again. And yet the household may be weaker than it was in December. So medieval peasants survived winter by thinking beyond winter. They saved seed, even when eating it might answer immediate hunger. They protected animals because spring labour depended on them. They preserved tools because broken tools in spring could become failed planting. They stretched grain because a full bowl tonight might mean an empty one later. This kind of discipline is not heroic in the loud sense. It is quieter and harder. It asks a person to be hungry now so the future can happen. And the future was often stored in animals. A cow, an ox, a pig, a goat, a sheep, hens. Each animal sat at a different point in the household's calculations. Some could provide milk, eggs, wool, labour, manure, meat, or offspring. Some were too valuable to lose casually. Some were expensive to feed through winter. A pig might be slaughtered before deep winter because keeping it alive would consume too much. Meat could be salted or smoked where possible, turning an animal's body into stored survival. A cow might be protected because milk, manure, calves, and value mattered beyond the present hunger. An ox could be essential for work. A flock could mean wool and future wealth, but also constant care. The animal's warmth was only one part of its winter meaning. In some houses or regional building types, livestock stayed close enough to human living space that their heat affected the building. But even where animals were separate, they remained part of the household's thermal world, because keeping them alive kept the human future warm. Manure enriched fields. Fields produced grain. Grain made bread and pottage. Pottage warmed the child. Nothing stayed in its own category. The same circle appears in wool. A sheep in a winter field or fold is not simply an animal enduring weather. It is next year's fibre. It is future cloth, future hose, future blankets, future repairs. Wool is warmth before it is even shorn. Protecting the sheep is protecting a garment that does not yet exist. This is the kind of long-thinking peasant life demanded, though it would not have been spoken in grand terms. It was just the way necessity arranged the mind. Necessity also shaped what people considered edible. Modern comfort gives many people the luxury of preference. Medieval winter often narrowed that luxury. Food that was coarse, stale, smoky, sour, tough, thin, or repetitive could still be precious. A hard crust softened in broth, old bread thickening a pot, dried peas cooked down slowly, cabbage and leeks giving taste to grain, beans filling the stomach, oats or barley prepared in ways that warmed more than delighted, a scrap of meat flavouring more than feeding. These are not failures of cuisine, they are strategies of endurance. The pot becomes a place where small things are persuaded to become enough. It is easy to mock pottage because it lacks drama. But pottage may be one of the central technologies of medieval survival. It accepts variety. It uses leftovers. It stretches grain. It can be kept warm or reheated. It softens old food. It turns fuel into many portions. It lets a household adapt to what remains. One day thicker, one day thinner, one day with beans, one day with leeks, one day with a bone, one day with nothing to brag about at all. The pot records the household's condition more honestly than any chronicler, and someone must know how to manage it. Cooking in this world is not simple. Fire is uneven. Fuel differs. Pots scorch. Ingredients vary. Timing matters. Smoke stings. Children interrupt with the full confidence of children. Animals need attention. Someone comes in cold and wants food now, as if the pot has been personally lazy. The person responsible for feeding the household must make scarcity appear orderly. That labour is easy to overlook because it leaves no monument. But winter survival often sits in the hand that knows when to add water, when to save grain, when to serve, when to wait, and how to make a meal seem larger than it is. Hunger also changes social life. A hungry village can become tense. Theft becomes more tempting. Accusations sharpen. Charity becomes harder when everyone is counting. A household that borrows too often may lose standing. A family with stores may become cautious about showing them. A lord's demands may feel heavier when the granary is low. The moral world of winter is complicated because people are asked to be generous precisely when generosity is most expensive. And yet generosity existed. A meal shared, a child fed, a widow helped, a neighbour given fire, fodder, or grain, a parish collection, a kinship obligation honoured. These acts did not remove hardship, but they changed its shape. They made winter less solitary. They reminded people that survival could be communal without being easy, warm without being soft, practical without being pure. As evening comes again, the household's food stores are not abstract. They are present in the room like silent witnesses. A sack in the corner, onions hanging, roots packed away, beans dried hard as little stones, a piece of salted meat saved for a more important day, cheese wrapped or stored, ale in a vessel, grain protected from damp and teeth. Each item is a piece of time held back from decay. The fire receives another careful feeding. The pot returns to its slow work. Steam rises into smoky air. A child watches, perhaps hoping tonight's bowl will be thicker. An adult knows exactly how much thicker it can afford to be. Winter asks the same question in many languages. Wood, grain, wool, straw, flesh, daylight, patience. The household answers with a ladle, and that ladle, moving through the pot, belongs mostly to a world of work that official records often treat as background, even though the household could not survive an ordinary cold week without it. Winter survival was deeply gendered in many medieval villages, though never in a perfectly simple way. Men, women, Children, servants, elders, and hired labourers all worked according to local custom, household need, season, status, and emergency. Women could labour in fields, tend animals, brew, sell, carry, manage, mend, cook, spin, nurse, and negotiate. Men could cook, repair, tend animals, gather fuel, and perform household tasks when need required. Real life is always messier than tidy categories, but across much of rural Europe, a great deal of the daily indoor winter labour that kept bodies warm and fed fell heavily on women's hands. That matters because the question, how did peasants survive freezing winters, can sound as if the answer is fireplaces and wool. But fireplaces do not feed themselves. Wool does not spin itself. Food does not preserve itself. Children do not tuck themselves away from drafts. The survival system depended on work that was constant, skilled, and easy for later centuries to underestimate because it happened close to home. Take spinning. It seems quiet. It does not look like ploughing a field or cutting wood. It does not make the dramatic strike of an axe or the deep line of an ox team moving through soil. But thread is one of the foundations of warmth. Without thread, no cloth. Without cloth, fewer garments, fewer blankets, fewer wrappings, fewer sacks, fewer patches, fewer ways to hold the body together against cold. A woman spinning by firelight is not filling idle time with a quaint craft. She is manufacturing winter defence, one length of fibre at a time. The spindle, or later in some places the spinning wheel, turns cold into future cloth very slowly. Wool must be cleaned, prepared, spun, woven, fulled, cut, sewn, and maintained. Flax, where linen is made, demands its own chain of labour, from growing and processing to spinning and weaving. Every stage takes knowledge. The difference between a usable thread and a useless tangle is not magic. It is practice held in the fingers. A tired spinner can still work while listening to children, watching the pot, glancing at the hearth, and carrying on conversation, because human beings have always been astonishing at combining labour with more labour, and then being told they were merely at home. The clothing that results is not just warmth, it is social order. Who has a good cloak? Who has a patched one? Who owns enough linen to change? Who must wear damp clothing longer than is healthy? Who can afford dyed cloth, better wool, stronger shoes, or extra bedding? Clothing reveals wealth, age, occupation, dignity, shame, inheritance, and loss. In winter, it also reveals risk. A person poorly clothed is not just visibly poor, they are physically more exposed. And women's textile labour tried to reduce that exposure. Mending is even less glamorous than making, but it may matter more on a cold night. A tear at the shoulder lets air enter. A worn heel lets damp rise. A frayed blanket edge spreads. A child's garment becomes too small, then somehow must still be made useful. Mending turns damage back into service. It delays the moment when a thing becomes useless. In a poor household, delay is survival. The needle is a winter tool. So is the brewing vat, where brewing was part of household life in many regions. Ale or small beer could provide calories, safer drink in some circumstances, and a daily beverage where customary. Brewing required grain, fuel, vessels, water, timing, and knowledge. It was not merely cheerful tavern culture drifting into the house. It was labour, often associated with women in many medieval communities, though commercial brewing and gender roles varied over time and place. A warm drink, a nourishing drink, a drink that made grain usable in another form. All of this belonged to winter's wider economy. Then there is washing, though perhaps not in the modern sense of regular hot baths and laundry machines. Keeping clothing, linens, bodies, and household objects usable required water, effort, and judgment. In freezing weather, washing becomes a harsher task. Water must be fetched, perhaps heated if fuel can be spared, and wet cloth must somehow dry. Too much washing in the wrong conditions could create more dampness than cleanliness. Too little invites other problems. Again, winter survival lives in compromise. A household may smell smoky, animal-rich, sour, and damp to us, but that does not mean its people lacked standards. Their standards served different conditions. They knew the difference between ordinary smoke and dangerous burning, between usable sourness and spoilage, between bedding that needed changing and bedding that must last longer because there was no replacement, between a garment that could be worn and one that threatened the skin. Cleanliness was not absent. It was negotiated through scarcity. Care work is another form of heat. A baby kept warm is not just wrapped once and forgotten. Someone checks. Someone adjusts. Someone feeds. Someone listens. Someone wakes when the child stirs. Someone notices whether the little body is too cold or feverish, whether breathing sounds wrong, whether the blanket has shifted. An elderly person may need help moving nearer the fire, more covering, softer food, or watching through illness. A sick worker may need rest the household can barely afford. Care uses time, food, warmth, and emotional strength. It is one of the most expensive things poor people give each other. And care has no season off. Winter makes it heavier because every dependency becomes sharper. A person who cannot fetch fuel in summer is an inconvenience. A person who cannot fetch fuel in winter may change the whole household's burden. A nursing mother needs food. A child needs supervision near fire. An old person's weakness may require someone else to carry water. When one body falters, other bodies must spend more warmth to protect it. This is why households were survival units, not just emotional units. A medieval peasant family was not simply a collection of private individuals sharing affection under one roof. It was also a working group. Its members produced, stored, cooked, repaired, tended, carried, guarded, and reproduced labour itself. Children learned tasks early, not because childhood did not exist, but because need recruited them. Elders, when they could no longer do heavy labour, might still watch children, sort, advise, mend, guard memory, shell peas, tend small fires, or notice what younger people missed. Value did not always come from strength alone. Still, the household could be unequal and harsh. It is important not to turn cooperation into fantasy. Authority mattered. Gender mattered. Age mattered. Marriage could bring protection. Labour partnership, tension, dependency, or danger. Servants might work hard in exchange for board, wages, training, or future prospects, but their comfort depended on the household. Children could be loved and still worked hard. Poor families could be tender, irritable, generous, controlling, funny, exhausted, and unfair, all in the same evening. Winter does not make people saintly. It makes their interdependence harder to ignore. The cold also shapes sound inside the home. As the evening tasks gather again, there may be the scratch of a needle through cloth, the low whirl of spinning, the knock of a wooden bowl, the scrape of a pot, the sigh of someone sitting too close to smoke because the warmth is worth it. A child asks whether there is more food. Someone answers in a tone that means no, but does not want to say no. A woman lifts cloth toward the fire and judges its dampness with her fingers. A man checks a tool handle near the doorway. An older voice says the wind has shifted. Someone else says it always shifts when it plans to be annoying, which is not meteorology, but may be emotionally accurate. The work is intimate because the space is small. No one can fully escape another person's tasks. The smell of cooking enters clothing. Smoke enters hair. Wool fibres cling. A crying child is heard by everyone. A quarrel does not stay politely in one room. Neither does laughter. Winter compresses domestic life until each person becomes part of everyone else's weather. And in that compressed space, warmth is made socially as well as physically, not only by hugging or sharing beds, though those matter. Warmth is made when someone remembers to move the damp shoes, when someone lets the smaller child take the safer place, when someone patches the sleeve before the tear widens, when someone serves the old person first, or perhaps fails to, revealing a different truth about the household. When someone stays awake long enough to keep the fire from dying too early, when someone gives up a better covering because another body needs it more. These acts can be loving, dutiful, resentful, automatic, or all of those at once. That complexity is what makes the peasant winter house human. It is not a museum scene arranged around a picturesque fire. It is a living machine of needs and negotiations. Food moves from pot to bowl, cloth moves from lap to body, heat moves from ember to air to skin. Labour moves from one person to another when strength runs short. Words move through smoke, sometimes kind, sometimes sharp, often tired. By now, the day's last light is nearly gone again. The household has come full circle, without ever truly returning to the same place. More food has been eaten, more fuel has vanished, more cloth has been mended, more damp has been fought. More small decisions have been made, each one leaving the household slightly changed. The fire is fed carefully, the room gathers close. The tools of women's work, men's work, children's work, old hands' work, all settle near one another in the dimness, because winter does not care who receives credit. It only cares whether the work was done, and when the work was done, or as done as winter allowed it to be, the household still had to face something that no amount of routine could fully soften. Illness. Cold by itself was not the only danger. It opened doors for other dangers. A chilled body, a smoky room, damp bedding, thin food, crowded sleeping, poor ventilation, and constant fatigue could turn a small weakness into a household problem. A cough might be ordinary. A fever might pass. A child might recover after a few frightening nights. But no one in a medieval winter could treat sickness as a separate event sealed away from daily survival. Illness entered the same room as the fire, the food, the animals, the bedding, and the work. A person who fell sick did not simply rest in a private bedroom, or the rest of life continued smoothly. If an adult could not rise, water still had to be fetched. Animals still had to be fed. Fuel still had to be managed. Food still had to be prepared. Children still had to be watched. The sick body consumed warmth, care, and time, while no longer producing its usual share of labour. This did not make the person unloved. It made illness frightening in a practical way. In a household built on everyone's usefulness, one person's weakness changed the weight carried by all the others. The winter room held that tension closely. Someone coughing near the hearth might be moved nearer the warmth, if space allowed. Or they might remain where they were because there was no better place. A child with fever might be wrapped too warmly, then uncovered, then checked again by a hand against the forehead, because the old human thermometer is touch. An elder's breathing might be listened to in the dark. A mother might wake before anyone else hears a child stir. A tired father might pretend not to be worried because worry is another burden, and yet worry would be there, sitting beside the ashes. Medical care existed, but not in the clean, modern form we imagine when we think of clinics, prescriptions, and reliable diagnosis. Medieval people had remedies, household knowledge, charms, prayers, herbs. Learned medicine for those with access, folk practices, local healers, barber surgeons in some contexts, clerical care, and advice passed through families. Some remedies may have helped, some did little, some were based on ideas we no longer accept. But it would be wrong to imagine people simply doing nothing. They acted within the knowledge and resources available to them. They warmed drinks, they prepared broths or soft foods if they could. They used herbs where known and available. They prayed, they watched, they adjusted bedding. They tried to keep the sick person from deeper chill. They might seek help if help was reachable and affordable. They made judgments from experience. And experience is not the same as ignorance, even when it is not modern science. Still, winter limited every choice. To fetch a healer, or a priest, or a relative, someone might have to travel through bad